It's wonderful to have you here. You crossed the finish line, and something you expected to feel didn't arrive. Science has a name for this. The neurochemical architecture that drives you toward a goal is built for pursuit, not arrival. The dopamine system that carried you forward was always aimed at the gap between where you were and where you wanted to be. And the moment that gap closed, the system ran out of signal. The part most people don't expect. The emptiness is not a sign that something went wrong. It's a sign that the system worked exactly as designed, and now it needs something you may have been skipping. Welcome to Sleepy Science Facts. Something is already shifting. Breathe slowly now. Let your thoughts soften. And now we begin. Dopamine is often described as the brain's reward chemical, but this is only partly accurate. Neuroscience research consistently shows that dopamine is more precisely a chemical of anticipation. It surges in response to the expectation of a reward, not the reward itself. A 2023 review in Nature Neuroscience confirmed that dopamine neurons in the ventral tegmental area fire most powerfully when a goal is approaching, not when it is achieved. This is why the excitement before a vacation often exceeds the excitement of being on one. The brain was designed by evolution to keep you moving forward, and the signal it uses is oriented toward what lies ahead. Why does emptiness appear right after we achieve what we wanted? The answer begins here, in the architecture of anticipation. The dopamine pathway most involved in goal pursuit is called the mesolimbic system, sometimes called the brain's reward circuit. It runs from the ventral tegmental area deep in the midbrain, through a structure called the nucleus accumbens, and into the prefrontal cortex. When you are working toward a goal, planning, striving, getting closer, this pathway is continuously active. Dopamine flows steadily, keeping motivation high, attention focused, and energy available. Researchers studying this circuit have described it as the brain's drive engine. And like any engine, it is designed for motion, not for rest. When the goal disappears because it was achieved, the engine is idling. The silence that follows is neurochemical, not personal. The prefrontal cortex plays a central role in goal-directed behavior by holding the mental image of what you are working toward, what scientists call a goal representation. As long as the goal is unmet, this representation stays active, calling resources toward it, shaping decisions, and creating the sense of purpose that makes daily effort feel meaningful. Neuroimaging studies using fMRI have shown that goal representations in the prefrontal cortex show measurably reduced activation immediately after goal completion. The brain does not automatically generate a new goal. It simply registers that the current one is done, and the activation drops. In that gap, before a new direction is established, the experience of purposelessness is neurologically real. The psychological phenomenon of feeling deflated after achieving a major goal has been studied under several names, including post-achievement depression, goal achievement letdown, and arrival fallacy. The term arrival fallacy, introduced by psychologist Tal Ben-Shahar, describes the mistaken belief that reaching a significant goal will produce lasting happiness. Research consistently finds that while achieving goals does produce positive emotion, the effect decays rapidly, typically within days to weeks. What psychologists call hedonic adaptation means that the brain recalibrates its emotional baseline quickly. The achievement becomes ordinary. The elevation you expected to feel permanently becomes temporary, and the return to baseline feels, by contrast, like a loss. One of the clearest demonstrations of post-achievement deflation comes from research on Olympic athletes. Studies in sports psychology have documented a pattern, sometimes called post-Olympic depression, in which athletes experience low mood, purposelessness, and disorientation in the weeks and months following major competition. These athletes trained for years. They achieved the goal completely. And yet a meaningful proportion describe the aftermath as one of the more difficult periods of their lives. What makes this finding useful is that it separates the phenomenon from individual weakness or ingratitude. It shows that the emptiness after achievement is a consistent, predictable neurological event, not a character flaw. The role of cortisol is often overlooked in discussions of post-achievement emptiness. While dopamine drives toward the goal, cortisol, the brain's primary stress hormone, plays a parallel role in maintaining the urgency that keeps you focused under pressure. During a demanding pursuit, cortisol levels remain elevated, contributing to alertness, stress tolerance, and the sense that what you are doing matters. When the goal is achieved, cortisol drops. This drop is healthy. But because the body was accustomed to the elevated baseline, the return to normal can feel like depletion rather than relief. The quiet feels flat because the nervous system had calibrated itself to sustained tension. The anterior cingulate cortex, a region that monitors the gap between current state and desired state, plays a notable role in the motivational drive that sustains long-term goal pursuit. Research in cognitive neuroscience has shown that this region generates a persistent signal as long as a discrepancy between where you are and where you want to be exists. This error signal is uncomfortable. It is meant to be. It is the neural equivalent of a reminder that something remains unfinished. When the goal is achieved, the error signal ceases. The discomfort lifts, but so does the forward-pulling tension that gave your days structure and direction. The anterior cingulate, briefly, goes quiet. Sleep plays a documented role in emotional regulation and the processing of goal-related states. Research published in the journal Current Biology has shown that slow-wave sleep, the deep, non-dreaming stages of the sleep cycle, is particularly useful for consolidating motivational memories and supporting the stability of dopamine-linked reward systems over time. When sleep is shortened or disrupted during a period of high-stakes goal pursuit, the brain's dopamine pathways show measurable signs of dysregulation. This is relevant to post-achievement emptiness because many people, during the final push toward a goal, sacrifice sleep. The brain arrives at the achievement in a state of neurochemical debt. The nucleus accumbens, a key node in the mesolimbic reward circuit, is sensitive to a phenomenon called dopamine contrast. When dopamine rises sharply and then falls, the subjective experience of the fall is disproportionately negative. This is partly why the crash after eating high-sugar foods feels worse than simply being hungry. and why the days after a celebration can feel lower than ordinary days. Neuroscience research has shown that the nucleus accumbens responds not only to absolute dopamine levels, but to the rate and direction of change. A sharp drop following a high, even if the absolute level remains above baseline, is registered as a signal of loss. Achievement can produce exactly this kind of contrast. The brain's default mode network, a set of interconnected regions that activate during rest, self-reflection, and future planning, becomes unusually prominent after a major goal is completed. When external demands drop and the structured pursuit ends, the default mode network takes over. It begins replaying past events, generating self-referential thoughts, and searching for new narrative direction. Research has shown that this can feel disorienting, particularly in people who maintained high external focus for extended periods. The default mode network's activity is sometimes experienced as an endless inner loop of questioning. What now? Was it worth it? Who am I without this goal? These are not signs of dysfunction. They are the sound of a brain reorganizing. Psychologists studying goal theory distinguish between two types of goals based on their orientation. Approach goals, which are aimed at gaining a positive outcome, and avoidance goals, which are aimed at preventing a negative one. Research consistently shows that people who frame their major goals as approach goals, moving towards something desired, experience more post-achievement deflation than those pursuing avoidance goals. This is partly because approach goals create a clear ending point. The positive outcome is either achieved or not. When it is achieved, the drive that powered the pursuit has no natural continuation. The goal was the destination, and the destination has been reached. The brain's orbitofrontal cortex, a region involved in evaluating rewards, shows an interesting pattern of activity during and after goal-directed behavior. In studies using reward learning paradigms, neuroscientists have found that the orbitofrontal cortex updates its value estimates based on what has actually been experienced. When an anticipated reward is finally received, the orbitofrontal cortex compares the actual experience to the expected one. Because expectations built during long periods of anticipation tend to be idealized, the actual reward often falls short of the anticipated one. The orbitofrontal cortex registers this discrepancy as a form of prediction error, and the emotional experience of that error is often indistinguishable from mild disappointment. Identity plays a notable role in post-achievement emptiness. Psychologists studying goal pursuit and self-concept have noted that major goals often become deeply integrated into a person's identity over time. The student working toward graduation, the athlete working toward a title, the person working toward a promotion. The goal organizes not only their time, but their self-understanding. Research published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology has shown that when a goal closely tied to identity is achieved, people often experience a brief identity vacuum. The old self-definition, "I am someone working toward X," dissolves. The new one, "I am someone who achieved X," does not carry the same motivational charge. The serotonin system, which contributes to mood stability and the sense that life is generally meaningful, interacts closely with the dopamine system during goal pursuit. When dopamine is active during the approach to a goal, It appears to support the expression of serotonin in regions related to well-being. When dopamine drops sharply after goal completion, serotonin activity in those regions may dip as well, though the precise mechanism is still being studied. Research in mood neuroscience suggests this temporary shift contributes to the low-grade flat affect that many people describe after major achievements. It is not a clinical depression, but it has a similar neurochemical flavor, a sense that the color has gone out of ordinary experience. The relationship between sleep and the dopamine system is more dynamic than a simple rest and reset mechanism. Researchers studying dopamine receptor expression have found that chronic sleep restriction, as few as 4 to 5 nights of 6 hours or less, measurably reduces the density of dopamine D2 receptors in the striatum, a key region of the reward circuit. Fewer receptors means less sensitivity to dopamine. This creates a condition in which ordinary rewards feel less rewarding, and the brain responds by increasing drive toward larger stimulation. In the context of post-achievement emptiness, a sleep-deprived brain is particularly vulnerable. Its reward circuitry is already blunted before the achievement even arrives. The phenomenon of post-achievement emptiness is not limited to humans. Animal research using rodent models of goal-directed behavior has shown that after the successful completion of a learned task, dopamine signaling in the nucleus accumbens decreases, and animals show measurable reductions in exploratory behavior. They become briefly less active, less curious, and less responsive to new stimuli. This behavioral pattern, a kind of post-completion quiescence, appears to be conserved across species. It suggests that the brief slowdown after achievement may serve an evolutionary function, a period of reduced activity that allows the nervous system to consolidate what was learned and recalibrate before the next pursuit begins. Sleep is the mechanism through which much of this consolidation occurs. Psychologists distinguish between extrinsic goals, those aimed at external outcomes like money, status, or recognition, and intrinsic goals, those aligned with personal values, curiosity, or growth. A substantial body of research, including the foundational work of Edward Deci and Richard Ryan on self-determination theory, has found that extrinsic goals produce more pronounced post-achievement deflation than intrinsic ones. This is partly because extrinsic goals do not feed the psychological needs that sustain well-being: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. When an extrinsic goal is achieved, the reward circuit activates briefly, but the deeper motivational infrastructure remains unchanged. The feeling that something is still missing is not irrational. It is accurate. The insular cortex, a region involved in interoception, the brain's awareness of internal body states, shows distinctive patterns of activity during goal pursuit and its aftermath. Research using functional neuroimaging has linked the insula to the physical sensations associated with motivation: the tightening before a deadline, the energy before a performance, the weight of sustained effort. After a goal is achieved, the insula's motivational input decreases along with cortisol and dopamine. People sometimes describe the result as a physical flatness. Not sadness, exactly, but a bodily sense that something that had been leaning forward has gone still. The body, as well as the mind, needs time to reorganize after high sustained drive. sleep architecture changes during periods of intense goal pursuit. Research in sleep medicine has documented that people in the final stages of major goal-directed work, completing dissertations, meeting high-stakes deadlines, preparing for competitions, often show fragmented sleep with reduced slow-wave sleep and altered REM patterns. These changes are not benign. Slow-wave sleep is the phase during which the brain clears metabolic waste, consolidates declarative memories, and performs some of its most important maintenance. Arriving at a goal with a deficit of slow-wave sleep means the brain has accumulated a biochemical backlog that only nights of recovery sleep can address. The emptiness felt after achievement may be, in part, a symptom of this debt. The concept of ego depletion, developed by social psychologist Roy Baumeister, describes the finding that self-regulatory capacity, willpower, focused attention, impulse control, is a limited resource that becomes depleted with use. While some later research has revisited the precise mechanisms involved, the broader principle has held across many studies. Sustained self-regulation is cognitively costly. A major goal pursued over months or years requires continuous self-regulation. By the time it is achieved, the very cognitive systems that powered the pursuit are often in need of restoration. Sleep is the primary mechanism by which these systems restore. The emptiness after achievement may partly reflect the brain's signaling that its most effortful capacities are ready to rest. The hippocampus, the brain region most associated with memory formation and spatial navigation, also plays a role in goal-directed motivation by encoding the ongoing narrative of progress toward a goal. Research in spatial neuroscience has shown that the hippocampus creates cognitive maps, not only of physical spaces, but of abstract goal spaces, tracking how close an agent is to an objective. When the goal is reached, the hippocampus must update its map. The journey encoded over months becomes a completed episode rather than an ongoing one. This transition, from open story to closed story, has a counterpart in the emotional system. Closed stories do not pull the way open ones do. The pull was part of the feeling of being alive in the pursuit. In the neuroscience of motivation, researchers describe a phenomenon called the peak end rule, originally proposed by psychologist Daniel Kahneman. It describes how memory evaluates experiences, not by their average quality, but by their peak intensity and how they end. Major goal pursuits typically have high peaks, moments of progress, breakthroughs, intense effort, but their endings are often anticlimactic. The actual moment of achievement is frequently mundane. Submitting a document, receiving a notification, crossing a finish line. Because the ending is flat, memory encodes the experience as less rewarding than the process felt. This can create a retrospective confusion. The pursuit felt more meaningful than the arrival, because, neurologically, it was. The amygdala, the brain's primary threat and emotion detection center, calibrates its baseline activity partly based on anticipated threats and challenges. During goal pursuit, when significant stakes are involved, the amygdala remains subtly activated, alert to obstacles, setbacks, and the possibility of failure. This low-level alertness contributes to the sense of urgency that many goal-driven people find energizing. When the goal is achieved and the threat of failure disappears, amygdala activity drops. What follows is not always relief. For people who have been in a state of high-stakes alertness for extended periods, the drop in amygdala tone can feel disorienting. Like the sudden absence of a sound that was there so long, it became background silence. The neurological relationship between sleep and the processing of emotionally significant events is well established in affective neuroscience. REM sleep in particular is associated with what researchers call emotional memory consolidation, the process by which the emotional charge of recent experiences is gradually reduced while the factual content is retained. A team from the University of California, Berkeley, led by Matthew Walker, has shown that REM sleep serves as a kind of overnight therapy, allowing the brain to reprocess charged memories in a neurochemical environment stripped of the stress hormone norepinephrine. This is directly relevant to achievement. The event of reaching a major goal carries emotional weight, pride, relief, disorientation, grief, that requires REM processing to integrate fully. What the first arc of tonight has revealed is this: the emptiness after achievement is not a psychological failing or a sign of ingratitude. It is a predictable consequence of the way the brain's motivational architecture is built. Dopamine is a directional chemical. It generates force toward an unmet goal, and it falls when the goal is met. The cortisol that maintained urgency drops. The prefrontal goal representation goes quiet. The identity built around the pursuit needs time to reorganize. And the sleep sacrificed during the push has left a debt in the very systems designed to help the brain recalibrate. Why does emptiness appear right after we achieve what we wanted? Not because something is wrong, because everything worked, and now the brain needs what came after. Right now, the dopamine system that carried you through every push, every setback, every late night of your pursuit, has arrived somewhere it was not designed to stay. Not because you failed, because it succeeded. That chemistry, the signal that kept moving you forward, has a natural resting point. And your body has been moving toward it since the moment you stopped striving. The question that just opened, about what the brain needs in the silence that follows, lives in exactly the quality of this quiet. In what happens when the system finally gets what it was never allowed during the push. What you haven't heard yet is what sleep actually builds in that silence. That is where the next arc begins. Notice your breath. The system is already demonstrating its answer. Now we continue. Sleep scientists have identified slow wave sleep, also called deep sleep or N3 stage sleep, as the phase most useful for restoring the systems depleted during sustained goal pursuit. During slow wave sleep, the brain undergoes a process of synaptic homeostasis, a large-scale resetting of neural connection strength that clears the accumulation of potentiated synapses built up during waking, learning, and effort. Research led by Giulio Tononi and Chiara Cirelli at the University of Wisconsin has shown that this overnight resetting is not merely a maintenance function. It is a preparation. The brain clearing space so that new learning, new motivation, and new goal representations can form the following day. Without it, the neural substrate for future purpose remains cluttered with the residue of the completed one. The glymphatic system, a network of channels surrounding the brain's blood vessels, facilitates the clearance of metabolic waste from brain tissue and is most active during slow-wave sleep. Evidence from rodent studies, supported by indirect human research, suggests that this system flushes out proteins and byproducts that accumulate during waking hours, including adenosine, a sleepiness-promoting molecule that builds up with prolonged waking. When slow-wave sleep is reduced, as often happens during intense goal pursuit periods, this clearance is incomplete. The morning after a night of poor sleep carries a neurological heaviness that is literal as well as metaphorical. Note glymphatic function in humans is an active area of ongoing research, and human evidence remains suggestive rather than definitive. The recovery of dopamine receptor sensitivity after depletion depends directly on sleep quality. Studies using positron emission tomography scanning have shown that even 2 weeks of adequate sleep can restore measurably reduced dopamine D2 receptor availability in the striatum following a period of sleep restriction. This finding has a clear implication for post-achievement recovery. The neurological machinery that will eventually generate motivation for a new goal cannot be rebuilt through rest alone, but only through deep, quality sleep. The brain cannot simply decide to care about something new. It must rebuild the capacity to care. And that rebuilding happens one night at a time. Norepinephrine, a neuromodulator closely related to adrenaline, plays a dual role in both waking alertness and the sleep process. During goal pursuit, norepinephrine levels remain elevated, supporting focus and readiness. Research by Matthew Walker's group and others has shown that during REM sleep, norepinephrine levels in the brain fall to their lowest point in the entire sleep-wake cycle, effectively reaching near zero in the locus coeruleus, the brain's primary source of norepinephrine. This steep drop is not incidental. It is what allows the brain to process emotionally charged memories without reactivating the stress response. The REM stage is, in part, defined by the absence of the chemical that kept you braced for the next obstacle. The process of establishing a new goal after completing a major one relies heavily on the medial prefrontal cortex and its connection to the hippocampus. Research in motivational neuroscience has shown that future goal representations, mental simulations of possible futures, are constructed using the same hippocampal prefrontal circuitry used to encode the past. Imagining a future worth pursuing requires that the hippocampus have available templates from past rewarding experiences to draw from. Sleep, particularly REM sleep, is when hippocampal memories are transferred and integrated into long-term storage. A person who has not slept well after an achievement may find that their imagination for new futures feels thin, not because the future isn't there, but because the brain hasn't finished the filing. Psychologists who study the post-achievement period often recommend what they call purposeful transition, a deliberate interval of reflection and reduced activity between completing a major goal and beginning the next one. Observations from high-performance domains, elite athletics, entrepreneurship, academic research, suggest that those who allow a genuine recovery period between major pursuits show better long-term motivation and creativity than those who immediately redirect into the next challenge. The temptation to fill the emptiness quickly with a new goal, a new project, a new drive is understandable. but the brain needs the quiet it is signaling for. The emptiness is not a problem to solve. It is a process to allow. Sleep is at the center of that process. The role of social connection in recovery from post-achievement depletion is supported by research on the opioid system. Endogenous opioids, natural pain-relieving molecules produced by the brain, are released in response to social bonding, physical contact, and shared celebration. These molecules act on a different part of the reward system than dopamine, contributing not to drive and pursuit but to comfort, belonging, and the feeling that the moment matters. Studies have shown that people who celebrate achievements with others who genuinely share in the meaning of the accomplishment show faster recovery of baseline mood than those who celebrate alone or receive only formal recognition. Connection is one of the neurological antidotes to dopaminergic depletion. Sleep's role in identity consolidation is an underexplored area of neuroscience. Research on the default mode network during REM sleep suggests that this phase is when the brain processes self-referential information, memories, values, and narratives about who we are and what we want. During the post-achievement period, when identity is in transition, from person pursuing X to person who achieved X, this REM processing may be particularly valuable. Several researchers have proposed that REM sleep facilitates what they call narrative self-continuity, the maintenance of a coherent sense of self across major life transitions. Without adequate REM, this consolidation is incomplete, and the identity uncertainty that follows achievement may persist longer. Exercise, though not sleep, is worth noting here as a documented modulator of post-achievement recovery. Physical activity stimulates the release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein that supports the growth and connectivity of neurons in regions including the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex. It is sometimes called the brain's fertilizer. Research has shown that moderate aerobic exercise, as little as 30 minutes 3 times per week, produces measurable increases in this protein that persist for days. In the context of post-achievement emptiness, this matters because it supports the very neural plasticity needed for new goal representations to form. Exercise, like sleep, is not simply maintenance. It is construction. The immune system and the brain's emotional state are more closely linked than once believed. Research in psychoneuroimmunology has shown that sustained periods of stress and high cortisol, characteristic of major goal pursuit, produce measurable changes in immune function. These changes include elevated inflammatory markers that, when they reach the brain, contribute to cognitive and emotional changes including fatigue, reduced motivation, and what researchers describe as sickness behavior. After a prolonged push, the immune system often begins its own form of recalibration, and the brain experiences the effects as a generalized heaviness. This is another reason post-achievement fatigue has a physical quality as well as an emotional one. The practice of writing about major life experiences, what psychologists call expressive writing, has been shown in repeated research trials to accelerate emotional recovery and support the transition between significant life phases. Studies by James Pennebaker at the University of Texas demonstrated that spending even 15 to 20 minutes writing about the emotional significance of a major experience reduces rumination, lowers cortisol, and increases subjective well-being over the following weeks. In the context of achievement and its aftermath, expressive writing may help the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus complete the narrative closure that the default mode network keeps seeking. Writing gives the inner voice a destination it can finally rest in. The circadian rhythm, the brain's internal clock governing the sleep-wake cycle, is sensitive to behavioral disruption during periods of intense goal pursuit. Research in chronobiology has documented that irregular sleep schedules, late-night work sessions, and high-stress periods disrupt circadian alignment, shifting the timing of cortisol, melatonin, and core body temperature rhythms. A disrupted circadian rhythm reduces the quality and restorative value of sleep, even when sleep duration is maintained. Recovery after a period of circadian disruption can take 1 to 2 weeks of regular sleep timing before the internal clock fully realigns. The restorative sleep needed after achievement may not arrive fully on the first night. The brain needs a stable rhythm, not merely duration. Memory consolidation during sleep follows a specific temporal sequence relevant to understanding achievement recovery. Research on offline learning, the improvement in performance that occurs during sleep without additional practice, shows that this consolidation is phase-specific. Declarative memories, the kind involved in learned information and personal narrative, are consolidated primarily during slow-wave sleep in the first half of the night. Emotional and procedural memories are consolidated primarily during REM sleep in the second half. A sleep period truncated in either half leaves different kinds of cognitive processing incomplete. For post-achievement recovery, which involves both narrative reorganization and emotional processing, a full-length sleep period, including both early slow-wave and late REM cycles, is particularly valuable. The brain's response to novelty, its ability to become genuinely interested in new ideas and pursuits, is partly regulated by the dopaminergic system in its rested state. Research in attention neuroscience has shown that novelty-seeking behavior, the motivational draw toward unfamiliar stimuli, requires baseline dopamine tone to function. A depleted or desensitized dopamine system does not lose its sensitivity to large rewards, but it does lose its sensitivity to small ones. The ordinary pleasures and minor curiosities that make daily life feel textured and alive. Recovery sleep restores this sensitivity. A brain that has slept well after a significant achievement is more likely to find genuine interest in small things, which is where the seeds of new purpose are usually found. The pattern of post-achievement recovery has been studied across domains from academic achievement to athletic performance to entrepreneurial success, and a consistent finding emerges. The speed of recovery correlates more strongly with sleep quality than with the magnitude of the achievement or the personality of the achiever. High achievers who prioritize sleep during the transition period between goals recover their sense of purpose, energy, and motivation more quickly than those who either push immediately into new work or spend the period resting without attention to sleep quality. What the brain needs after the chase is not merely stillness. It needs the specific, structured stillness of deep sleep, the kind that restores what the push consumed. Something is still with you, still sitting with the weight that effort leaves behind when it has nowhere left to go. Take a slow breath. Notice that the question is still there. just softer now. We're moving through the science of what comes after, together. And we'll keep going, gently. The process of forming new goals after the completion of a major one is not simply a cognitive act. It is a neurobiological one. Research in motivational psychology distinguishes between goal ideation, the generation of possible future goals, and goal commitment, the process by which one of those possibilities becomes motivationally active. Neuroimaging studies have shown that goal commitment involves a pattern of activation in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and the ventral striatum, the same regions involved in reward valuation. For a new goal to become motivationally binding, these regions must be able to assign it sufficient value. A dopamine-depleted or receptor-blunted reward system cannot do this efficiently. Goal commitment is physiologically downstream of recovery. Meaning-making, the cognitive and emotional process of integrating significant experiences into a coherent life narrative, is one of the most consistent predictors of well-being across cultures. Psychologist Martin Seligman's PERMA model identifies meaning as one of 5 core dimensions of flourishing, distinct from pleasure, engagement, relationships, and achievement. Research shows that the achievement itself does not automatically produce meaning. Meaning comes from the narrative placed around it. In the post-achievement period, the brain is searching for this narrative, asking not just what happened, but what it means for who I am and what comes next. This search is necessary, effortful, and incompletable in a single day. Sleep supports it by organizing the raw material. The brain's reward system was shaped by evolutionary pressures that valued the pursuit of resources rather than their possession. In ancestral environments, the successful hunt, the completed tool, the secured shelter all required immediate transition to the next demand. There was no designated rest period between accomplishment and the next challenge. Modern goal structures, degrees, careers, creative projects, can span years, far exceeding the timescales the reward circuit evolved to manage. When these long modern goals finally complete, the mismatch between their scale and the brain's short-cycle reward architecture is one source of the disproportionate emptiness. The system solved a long problem with machinery built for shorter ones. Studies in the psychology of regret have found a pattern worth knowing. People who achieve major goals sometimes experience a form of retrospective regret about the pursuit itself, a questioning of whether the sacrifices made were proportionate to the outcome. This has been called achievement regret and is distinct from failure regret. It arises not because the goal was wrong, but because the full costs of its pursuit become visible only in retrospect, when the motivational drive that made them feel worthwhile is gone. Dopamine, during the pursuit, effectively discounts future costs in favor of the anticipated reward. When dopamine falls after achievement, the accounting becomes clearer, and the costs that were absorbed during the chase can feel newly heavy. The science of transitions, periods between major life phases, has received increasing research attention in developmental psychology and lifespan science. Studies have shown that transitions, whether chosen or unchosen, involve a predictable psychological pattern: disengagement from the previous structure, a disorienting in-between period, and eventual re-engagement with a new structure. The anthropologist Arnold van Gennep described this as the structure of rites of passage, divided into separation, liminality, and incorporation. Modern goal completion mirrors this structure. The post-achievement emptiness corresponds to the liminal phase, the between time. It is not a breakdown. It is a passage. Sleep is what the passage moves through. Creativity, the ability to generate novel and useful ideas, shows measurable variation across the sleep-wake cycle. Research on the relationship between REM sleep and creative problem-solving has found that REM sleep facilitates what neuroscientists call remote associative thinking, the ability to find connections between ideas not obviously related. Ulrich Wagner and colleagues demonstrated in a study that people who slept after learning a problem were significantly more likely to discover hidden shortcuts than those who remained awake. In the post-achievement period, when the brain is searching for new directions and new meaning, this creative associative capacity is precisely what is needed. Sleep does not just restore energy. It generates the raw material for what comes next. The stress response system, also called the HPA axis, or hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, requires a genuine recovery period after sustained activation to return to its resting baseline. Research in stress physiology has shown that the HPA axis, after periods of chronic mild stress, like goal-directed high performance, can remain in a state of low-grade dysregulation for weeks after the stressor ends. This means the body does not simply relax the moment the goal is achieved. The hormonal system that drove the push lingers in an elevated state, contributing to irritability, poor sleep quality, and difficulty finding pleasure in ordinary activities. Recovery from sustained effort is a biological process with its own timeline. A growing body of research in the neuroscience of narrative identity suggests that the brain actively works to integrate significant life events into an ongoing story arc. Research by Dan McAdams and colleagues at Northwestern University has shown that people with coherent, meaning-rich life narratives show better psychological health, greater resilience, and higher life satisfaction than those whose narratives are fragmented or unresolved. A major goal completion is an acute narrative event, an ending that requires integration. The discomfort of post-achievement emptiness may partly be the feeling of an unfinished story. The chapter closed, but the next one has not yet found its opening line. The relationship between sleep duration and emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish between subtle differences in emotional states, has been studied in effective neuroscience. Research has found that sleep-deprived individuals tend to describe their emotional states in cruder, less differentiated terms. Things feel good or bad, and the more nuanced qualities that make emotional experience informative are blunted. This matters in the post-achievement context because the experience of emptiness after success is not a simple emotion. It is a complex mixture of satisfaction, loss, disorientation, and anticipation. A person with sufficient sleep is more likely to identify what they are feeling accurately, and accurate identification is the first step toward moving through an emotion rather than around it. Halfway through tonight, the picture that has emerged is both neurological and deeply human. The brain's dopamine system was built for the gap between where you are and where you want to be. And when that gap closes, the signal falls. The HPA axis that maintained urgency lingers in a dysregulated state. The identity built around the pursuit stands briefly undefined. Sleep sacrificed during the push has left a debt in the systems designed to rebuild motivation. The question that opened tonight: why does emptiness appear right after we achieve what we wanted? Has found a partial answer in chemistry and architecture. The question, the second half, follows. How does sleep begin to build the neurological conditions for what comes after? The question that just opened, about what the brain builds back during sleep, is not only a neuroscience question. You may be carrying a version of that emptiness right now. Something that has settled in the chest or the shoulders and doesn't have a clean name yet. That's what it feels like when the brain is still in the between. Notice your breath. It is moving without you directing it. The body already knows how to continue in the presence of what hasn't been answered yet. Now we continue. The recovery of motivational drive after goal completion follows a predictable neurochemical sequence that sleep accelerates. In the first phase, slow-wave sleep restores the synaptic homeostasis that allows the prefrontal cortex to form new representations without interference from exhausted old pathways. In the second phase, REM sleep processes the emotional content of the completed pursuit, reducing its charge, integrating its meaning, and creating the associative space needed for new connections. Research suggests this two-phase restoration typically requires several consecutive nights of full-length, undisturbed sleep. The brain does not rebuild in a single night. It rebuilds across nights. The prefrontal cortex, often called the seat of executive function, is among the brain regions most sensitive to sleep deprivation. Research using neuroimaging has shown that after even one night of inadequate sleep, glucose metabolism in the prefrontal cortex drops measurably, a literal reduction in the energy available for planning, decision-making, and future-oriented thinking. In the post-achievement period, when planning and direction-finding are most needed, a sleep-deprived prefrontal cortex is working at reduced capacity. The feeling that you cannot figure out what you want next may not be a question of desire. It may be a question of fuel. Research in sleep science has explored a phenomenon called targeted memory reactivation, in which memories are cued during sleep and show enhanced consolidation. In studies, participants learning a task were exposed to associated sounds during slow-wave sleep, and their performance on the associated elements improved more than on uncued elements. While this technique is experimental, the underlying mechanism, that memory consolidation during sleep is influenced by the emotional and contextual associations of the learned material, is well supported. For post-achievement recovery, this suggests that the brain during sleep is not passively resting, but actively reweaving the completed experience into long-term memory in ways that inform future motivation. Gratitude, when practiced as a deliberate cognitive activity rather than a social performance, has measurable effects on the brain's reward and well-being systems. Research from Robert Emmons at UC Davis has shown that people who regularly engage in structured gratitude reflection, identifying specific things of genuine value in their experience, show increased activation in the medial prefrontal cortex and increased life satisfaction compared to control groups. In the post-achievement context, gratitude is not a cure for dopaminergic depletion, but it can activate the opioid and serotonergic reward systems through meaning-making, providing a source of neurochemical comfort that does not depend on external achievement. The science of intrinsic motivation offers a useful frame for understanding what comes after extrinsic achievement. Self-determination theory identifies 3 psychological needs whose satisfaction produces sustained motivation: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Extrinsic achievements, those measured by external standards, often satisfy the need for competence while leaving the needs for autonomy and relatedness partially unmet. Researchers found that people who restructure their activity after major achievements to emphasize autonomy and connection tend to transition out of post-achievement emptiness more quickly. The dopamine system eventually restores, but the next goal becomes motivationally compelling most quickly when it resonates with values rather than comparisons. The hippocampus plays an important role in what researchers call episodic future thinking, the ability to mentally project oneself forward in time and imagine specific future experiences. This capacity is integral to goal formation. Studies have shown that episodic future thinking is impaired by both sleep deprivation and by high levels of post-task fatigue. The depleted brain has difficulty imagining specific, emotionally textured future events, which is precisely the cognitive fuel that new goals require to feel real and motivating. Recovery sleep does not just restore mood. It restores the neurological machinery for imagining a future worth working toward. The timing of sleep within the circadian day matters significantly for cognitive restoration. Research in sleep chronobiology has found that sleep obtained at the circadian appropriate time, meaning during the hours of biological night, roughly 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. for most adults, is substantially more restorative than the same amount of sleep obtained at an off-peak time. Circadian appropriate sleep produces longer slow-wave stages, more organized REM cycling, and more complete hormonal restoration. For post-achievement recovery, sleeping long but at irregular times is less effective than sleeping at consistent, biologically appropriate hours. The quantity of sleep matters. The timing matters more than many people realize. Research on awe, the emotion evoked by experiences of vastness, complexity, or transcendence, has found that it reliably reduces self-focused thought and increases feelings of meaning and connection. Studies by Daka Keltner at UC Berkeley have shown that awe experiences reduce activity in the default mode network's self-referential regions, while increasing activity in networks associated with social and environmental awareness. In the post-achievement period, when the default mode network is running its anxious self-referential loops, experiences of awe, nature, music, art, vast ideas can briefly interrupt those loops and introduce a different quality of engagement. Tonight, in some quiet way, is offering that. The relationship between post-achievement recovery and future performance has been studied in elite sports contexts, with results that challenge the cultural premium placed on relentless drive. Research published in the Journal of Applied Sports Psychology has found that athletes who took genuine recovery periods between major competitions, periods that included reduced training, social connection, and prioritized sleep, performed at higher levels in subsequent seasons than those who maintained continuous high effort. The recovery was not weakness. It was preparation. The brain that achieves, rests, and rebuilds is more capable of the next pursuit than the brain that refuses to stop. The ventral striatum, a core region of the reward circuit, shows a specific pattern of activity in anticipation of positive future events. Research using fMRI has shown that when people imagine a desired future outcome in concrete detail, the ventral striatum activates in a manner similar to how it activates when dopamine surges during goal pursuit. This finding suggests that vivid, specific future imagining is one of the most direct ways to begin restarting the motivational machinery after it has gone quiet. But vivid imagining requires cognitive resources. Specifically, a rested prefrontal cortex and a well-consolidated hippocampus. Sleep precedes the imagining. The body's autonomic nervous system, governing heart rate, breathing, digestion, and stress response, shifts during sleep in ways that directly support post-achievement recovery. During slow-wave sleep, the parasympathetic nervous system, sometimes called the rest and digest branch, becomes dominant. Heart rate variability, a measure of the autonomic system's flexibility and resilience, increases during this phase, indicating genuine physiological recovery. Research has confirmed that nights of high-quality slow-wave sleep produce measurable increases in autonomic resilience that persist into the following day. The calm of deep sleep is not merely subjective. It registers in the body's most basic rhythms. Researchers studying well-being draw a consistent distinction between hedonic well-being, the presence of positive emotions and absence of negative ones, and eudaimonic well-being, the sense of living meaningfully, growing, and contributing. Major achievements tend to produce hedonic spikes that fade quickly. Eudaimonic well-being, by contrast, is more stable and less dependent on the achievement of specific outcomes. Research has found that people who describe their lives as meaningful show different neurological profiles than those whose well-being depends primarily on achievement. They use the default mode network differently, for reflection and connection rather than rumination. Sleep supports the deeper well-being, not only the surface one. The concept of post-traumatic growth has a quieter analog in what some researchers call post-achievement growth. While less dramatic, studies have found that people who move through the post-achievement transition thoughtfully, allowing the disorientation, seeking meaning, and resting genuinely, often report a deepening of values, a clearer sense of what matters, and a more authentic relationship to future goals than they had before the achievement. The emptiness, when moved through rather than escaped, can function as a kind of clearing. The brain that has rested makes different choices than the brain that is still running on fumes. Light exposure in the evening significantly affects the brain's ability to enter and maintain deep sleep. Research in circadian neuroscience has consistently shown that blue wavelength light emitted by phones, laptops, and tablets suppresses melatonin production in the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the brain's master clock, delaying sleep onset and reducing the proportion of slow-wave sleep obtained in the first cycles. For post-achievement recovery, when the brain specifically needs slow-wave restoration of synaptic homeostasis and HPA axis recalibration. Screen use in the hour before bed directly diminishes the quality of the recovery being sought. The brain cannot rest on the same screen it was striving on. The experience of being understood, having one's effort and achievement genuinely witnessed by another person, activates the opioid reward system in a way that solo recognition does not. Research in social neuroscience has confirmed that feeling seen, in the relational sense, produces neurochemical responses distinct from pride. It engages circuits involved in physical comfort, belonging, and the reduction of social pain. In post-achievement transitions, this kind of witnessing is often missed. Congratulations are common. Genuine witnessing, someone who understands what the pursuit cost, is rarer. The brain responds differently to each. Research on the role of sleep in ethical decision-making has found that sleep deprivation increases impulsivity and reduces the capacity for considered moral reasoning. Studies have shown that sleep-deprived individuals are more likely to make decisions based on immediate self-interest rather than values-based considerations. In the post-achievement period, when questions of identity and direction are most active, what do I want now? What kind of person do I want to become? These decisions benefit from a rested, values-connected prefrontal cortex. The choices made in the weeks after a major achievement are shaping the next chapter. Sleep makes them wiser choices. The phenomenon of psychological entropy, described by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi as the mind's tendency toward disorder, rumination, and unease when it lacks organizing purpose, increases in the post-achievement period. His research on flow states showed that the mind enters its most ordered, attentive state when engaged in meaningful challenge just beyond current capacity. Without such challenge, the default state of the undirected mind is not rest, but mild agitation. Sleep is one of the only states in which the mind achieves genuine order without external structure. During slow-wave sleep, the brain moves into synchronized, low-frequency waves, the most organized electrical state available to it. The architecture of a truly restorative night includes 4 to 5 complete sleep cycles, each lasting approximately 90 minutes. In the first 2 cycles, slow-wave sleep predominates. In the later cycles, REM sleep lengthens, sometimes filling the majority of the final cycle. This distribution means that cutting a night short by even 90 minutes eliminates a disproportionate amount of REM sleep, since REM is concentrated at the end of the sleep period. Post-achievement recovery benefits particularly from late REM cycles, which process emotional memory and support creative association. A 7-hour night and an 8.5-hour night are not neurologically equivalent. Research in the field of self-compassion, primarily led by Kristin Neff at the University of Texas, has found that self-compassionate responses to perceived failure, disappointment, and difficulty produce better outcomes for emotional regulation and motivation than either self-criticism or forced positivity. What makes this relevant to post-achievement emptiness is that self-compassion involves treating oneself with the same care one would offer a friend in difficulty, acknowledging the feeling without amplifying it. Post-achievement emptiness is not failure, but it often gets treated as one. A brain that can meet its own disorientation with gentleness rather than judgment is a brain that recovers faster. The role of temperature in deep sleep is a practical area of sleep science worth knowing. The body's core temperature must drop by approximately 1 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit for the brain to enter and sustain slow-wave sleep. This is why cool sleeping environments around 65 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit consistently produce deeper and more restorative sleep than warm ones. The body sheds heat through the hands and feet, which is why warm extremities before sleep are associated with faster onset. For post-achievement recovery, when the body specifically needs slow-wave restoration, temperature management is one of the few environmental factors that directly and measurably improves sleep quality. The default mode network, highly active in the post-achievement period, shows measurable changes in its resting state connectivity as a result of long-term mindfulness practice. Researchers found that meditators show less activity in the default mode network's rumination-associated regions during rest, and more connectivity between those regions and the attention monitoring networks. While this finding is most robust for long-term practitioners, even brief mindfulness interventions, including mindful breathing and body scan practices, have been shown to temporarily modulate default mode activity. The post-achievement mind, left unattended, runs its loops. Given a gentle focus, it finds a different quality of quiet. Research on the neuroscience of gratitude has identified that genuine gratitude, felt rather than performed, activates the medial prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate cortex in patterns associated with reward and social bonding. A study using fMRI, published in Neuroimage, found that when participants recalled experiences of genuine gratitude, dopaminergic reward regions and opioid social bonding regions showed coordinated activation. This coordinated response suggests that gratitude engages both the drive system and the belonging system simultaneously, a neurological combination that the post-achievement period, with its deflated drive and often isolated celebration, tends to miss. Genuine gratitude is not a platitude. It is a specific neurochemical event. The capacity for wonder, the ability to find genuine interest in ordinary things, is one of the first casualties of sustained high-pressure goal pursuit and one of the last to return after its completion. Research in cognitive psychology has linked wonder to bottom-up attention, the capacity for the environment itself to capture focus without deliberate direction. This contrasts with top-down attention, the kind goal pursuit demands. A brain in sustained goal mode filters experience through the lens of relevance to the goal. Recovery involves gradually releasing that filter. Sleep, particularly REM sleep, is associated with the restoration of bottom-up attentional flexibility. Things become interesting again because the brain can notice them again. The body's parasympathetic nervous system, the restorative, calm-maintaining branch of the autonomic system, is most fully activated during slow-wave sleep. Research has shown that the depth of parasympathetic activation during sleep correlates with next-day emotional regulation capacity, the ability to respond to stresses without disproportionate reactivity. In the post-achievement period, when the nervous system is recalibrating after sustained sympathetic activation, this restoration is precisely what supports the emotional stability needed to navigate disorientation without panic. The brain that has slept deeply is less frightened by its own emptiness, less frightened by the silence where the drive used to be. The dopamine drop that follows achievement is not a flaw in the motivational system. It is the system's invitation. It signals that a cycle has completed, and that what the brain needs next is not a new goal, not yet, but the recovery that makes the next goal possible. Sleep is not where you put the day when it is over. Sleep is where the brain does the work the day did not allow, clearing metabolic waste, rebalancing neurotransmitters, consolidating what was accomplished, quietly rebuilding the neurological conditions for caring again. The emptiness after achievement is the space between one chapter and the next. And the brain fills it best, not with more striving, but with rest. Breathe slowly. Your dopamine system, the one that drove every push, every late hour, every moment of deciding to keep going, has come to a natural resting point. Not a collapse, a completion. The brain does not rush from one pursuit to the next without cost. It rests. It rebuilds. It prepares. Your breath is already doing that, moving at a pace that has nothing to prove. There is nothing to finish right now. There is no gap left to close. Only the quiet that the brain has been waiting for. The ordered, dark, unhurried stillness of genuine sleep. Let your body follow the pace your breath is already keeping. We'll continue with the final facts. Deep sleep does not merely pause the brain's activity. It reorganizes it. During slow-wave sleep, the brain generates large synchronized waves of electrical activity called slow oscillations, which travel from the prefrontal cortex toward the hippocampus and back, carrying memory traces and consolidating them into longer-term storage. Each wave is, in a small way, a kind of filing, experience being organized, sorted, and given a place in the narrative of a life. The neurons that fire together during waking learning replay their patterns at high speed during sleep, sometimes 20 times faster than in waking experience. Research by George Buzaki at NYU has documented these hippocampal replay events, which appear to be one of the mechanisms by which the brain converts recent experience into durable memory. The pursuit you just completed, the moments that mattered, the turns that surprised you, is being replayed and filed tonight. The prefrontal cortex, after deep rest, shows measurably greater metabolic activity than after disrupted sleep. More energy, more access to executive function, more capacity for the kind of deliberate, values-based thinking that shapes what comes next. Rest is not a pause between efforts. It is, for the brain, already the next effort, the one that makes all others possible. The emotion of grief, though rarely named in the context of success, is sometimes present in the post-achievement period. What was pursued for years becomes part of the past in a single day. Research on bereavement has shown that grief, even grief over endings that were chosen, follows its own timeline and resists acceleration. The brain needs to process what it has lost, even when what it lost was only a period of striving. Sleep gives grief its space without drama. adenosine, the molecule that accumulates in the brain during waking hours and drives the increasing pressure to sleep, is fully cleared during deep sleep. Its clearance corresponds to the restoration of alertness, mood, and cognitive function. Each night of deep sleep begins this clearance. The heaviness that follows sustained achievement, that specific exhaustion that rest alone does not fix, dissolves gradually across nights of sleep deep enough to clear what accumulated. The brain's sensitivity to beauty, to music, to art, to the quality of light in a room, is reduced by fatigue and gently restored by sleep. Research has shown that aesthetic appreciation involves the same prefrontal limbic circuits that support emotional regulation and openness to experience. A rested brain does not just function better. It is more capable of being moved by what is already present. The quality of the first thought of the morning, its tone, its direction, its openness, is one of the most reliable indicators of how restorative the preceding sleep was. A deep night produces a morning mind that feels genuinely open. Curiosity is present before intention. The new day has space before the brain fills it. This is the brain's way of showing that it is ready. The mesolimbic reward circuit, after a period of recovery sleep, shows restored sensitivity to small rewards. The pleasure of a warm cup of something, a quiet view, an interesting idea. These small responses are the signals through which new motivation begins to orient. The next chapter does not begin with a proclamation. It begins with small things starting to matter again. REM sleep is associated with what researchers call cognitive flexibility, the ability to shift between different ways of thinking, release fixed assumptions, and consider new possibilities. Post-achievement periods require exactly this flexibility. The framework that organized the previous goal needs to be released. A new one needs space to form. REM sleep loosens the rigidity of the old frame and opens the mind to what it could not see while it was focused. Research has found that the people who describe their lives as having meaning consistently spend more time in activities they find genuinely absorbing, not just important, but intrinsically interesting. The reconnection with genuine interest that follows achievement recovery is not trivial. It is the brain finding again what it actually cares about beneath the structure of the goal. Sleep accelerates this reconnection by clearing the noise that had been obscuring it. The body's circadian regulation of cortisol produces a natural peak in the early morning, often called the cortisol awakening response, which prepares the brain and body for the coming day. Research has shown that this response is amplified and more precisely timed after nights of quality sleep. A well-calibrated cortisol awakening response contributes to the feeling of morning readiness, the quiet sense that the new day is possible. This small hormonal event happens every morning. Sleep determines whether it arrives cleanly or in a diminished form. The capacity for patience, for allowing things to unfold in their own time without forcing resolution, is supported by prefrontal inhibitory function. When the prefrontal cortex is well rested, it can more effectively modulate the amygdala's urgency signals, creating the internal space that allows uncertainty to be held without panic, the patience to sit with post-achievement emptiness without immediately filling it with the next thing is, in part, a neurological capacity. Sleep maintains it. Research on post-achievement transitions in academic settings has found that students who allowed themselves unstructured time after completing major projects, time without a specific productivity agenda, showed faster recovery of intrinsic motivation and creative engagement than those who immediately began the next assignment. The brain needs unscheduled time to wander, to notice, to follow unexpected curiosity without purpose. This unstructured engagement is not laziness. It is the incubation period in which new directions quietly form. The sense of coherence, the feeling that life is comprehensible, manageable, and meaningful, was identified by health researcher Aaron Antonovsky as a strong predictor of long-term well-being and resilience. People with strong sense of coherence navigate transitions, including post-achievement transitions, with less distress and more adaptability. Research has found that sense of coherence is supported by adequate sleep, social connection, and values-aligned goals. It cannot be summoned by willpower. It is grown, slowly, through the ordinary conditions that let the brain be well. The experience of being still, not doing, not pursuing, not solving, is one that many high achievers describe as genuinely difficult and genuinely necessary. Contemplative research, now supported by neuroscience, shows that stillness allows a kind of integration that active engagement prevents. The full meaning of an achievement, the full sense of what it cost and what it gave, often only surfaces in quiet. Sleep is the deepest available stillness, and the brain uses every hour of it. The immune markers that elevated during high-stress goal pursuit begin to normalize with recovery sleep. Research in psychoneuroimmunology has shown that cytokines associated with inflammation, which at high levels contribute to cognitive fog and low mood, are downregulated during adequate sleep. The body's restoration is systemic, not only neural. Sleep heals simultaneously in the brain and in the tissues. The morning after, a deep night feels different in the body, not only in the mind. Research on psychological distance, the cognitive ability to think about events as less immediate and less emotionally proximate, has found that it supports more considered, values-based decision-making. Time creates psychological distance naturally. Sleep accelerates it. The morning after, a night of deep sleep, often offers a perspective on recent events that felt impossible the night before. The brain, having processed the material, holds it differently. The quality of emotional memory is changed by sleep. Emotions recalled after sleep tend to be less acute. The content is preserved, but the charge is reduced. Research at the Max Planck Institute has shown that memories reactivated after sleep are recoded with lower amygdala activation than those recalled immediately after experience. The achievement and its aftermath, when slept on, become part of the past in a way that makes the present feel less defined by them. Memory, after sleep, loosens its grip. The recovery of genuine curiosity, the interest in learning, discovering, and understanding that drives growth, depends on a brain that is neither depleted nor defended. Research has consistently found that curiosity is suppressed by high stress, fatigue, and the narrow focus that intense goal pursuit demands. After recovery, curiosity returns, often broader, more patient, less urgent. This is the brain indicating that it is ready not just to pursue, but to explore. Exploration precedes the next meaningful direction. The hours of sleep between approximately 2 and 6 in the morning are dominated by REM sleep in ways that make them disproportionately valuable for emotional and creative restoration. These are the hours most commonly sacrificed in high-performance lifestyles. Recovering them is not a luxury. For a brain navigating post-achievement transition, seeking new meaning, processing identity, forming new directions, these hours are among the most neurologically valuable available. They are where the most associative, creative, and emotionally integrating work of sleep occurs. What the brain seeks in the post-achievement quiet is not distraction or acceleration. It seeks coherence, the quiet integration of what was experienced into who one is. Sleep does not rush this process. It allows it, layer by layer, night after night, in the ordered dark. Each morning that follows is a little different from the one before. The return of genuine pleasure in ordinary things, the satisfaction of a meal, the comfort of familiar company, the interest in a small new problem is one of the earliest signs that dopaminergic recovery is underway. These small signals are the nervous system's way of reporting that the restoration is progressing. They deserve to be noticed. They are the beginning of what comes next. Each night of restorative sleep deposits something into the neurological conditions for future purpose. Not a purpose. Not yet. But the conditions. Sensitivity, flexibility, energy, emotional clarity, the ability to care about small things again. These are the materials. Sleep lays them down, one night at a time, in the quiet between one chapter and whatever follows. The brain cannot be rushed toward caring again, but it can be given what it needs to care: rest, quiet, time, the slow recalibration that only deep sleep provides. The brain that arrives at a new goal from a restored state is not the same brain that arrived at the last one exhausted. It carries its past differently. It moves forward with more of itself intact. Why does emptiness appear right after we achieve what we wanted? Because the pursuit was the signal, and the signal has stopped. Because dopamine is directional, and the direction closed. Because the brain was built for the gap, and the gap is gone. But the brain that understands this, that knows the emptiness is not permanent, that sleep is the specific restoration for the specific depletion, holds its own quiet differently. The answer is not that the emptiness is wrong. The answer is that it is the space where rest becomes possible, and where, with enough restorative sleep, the next chapter quietly begins. The dopamine that powered the chase was never going to stay. It was always aimed at the horizon, not the arrival. What reached the end was not the system. It was the particular direction the system was given. And in the silence that followed, in the emptiness that felt like something had been lost, the brain was already beginning the work the push never allowed. Clearing, recalibrating, rebuilding the neurological conditions for caring again. Sleep was always the answer to this. Not as a cure, as a continuation. The Sleepy Psychology Facts playlist has been following the architecture of the inner life, one mechanism at a time. The next video moves into territory tonight, only pointed toward what the brain builds in the silence after something ends. That video is waiting whenever you are ready. The thing that drove you this far is not gone. It is resting. Let your entire body follow. The clarity that the push consumed is already being restored. In the dark, in the quiet, in the hours you won't remember, but that will shape how morning feels. Let your body give itself over to this. If sleep comes, let it carry you into the part of the work that needed you to stop first. But if your eyes are closed, stay there. Rest well. Quiet one. The next direction will find you when the brain has had what it needs. Fall asleep to gentle facts, where science meets sleep. Good night.